Hello, all you happy innovators out there. How you doing? You hanging in there? I guess we're here, finally. The final episode of SnowFlake 33. Yeah, here we are. This is it. This is the last one. And I am going to continue the discussion about my dear old granddad. Okay? But before I do that, I'll just explain a couple of things to my listeners in case you are unaware. Okay? Now, while this is the last episode of SnowFlake 33 podcast, it's not my last podcast. Okay? So if you've enjoyed SnowFlake 33, don't worry. I do have plans to continue talking. Like I said prior, I'll repeat it. The format is going to change. The name is going to change. But I do have a better idea of what I want to do in the future and what I want SnowFlake 33 to become. So stay tuned. I will be releasing a new podcast. I will be starting a new podcast in September. I'm not exactly sure what day. I have been trying to release my SnowFlake 33s on Wednesdays, so I'll probably stay with that. Although I do kind of suspect that I'm going to be releasing sometimes at least more than one a week. Okay? So, I guess to give you a little bit of a hint about the direction, okay? I've gathered over the past year that my listeners, my small group of happy innovators, enjoys hearing the stories, right? So you can probably count on the majority of what I'm talking about in the future to be a lot of that, okay? 1, because I enjoy telling stories. 2, I have a lot of stories to tell. And 3, my audience seems, anyway, to enjoy them. So, there you go. There's a little clue as to the future, okay? But it's not limited to that. So, maybe sometimes I'll do some talking about issues or something. But I don't know. We'll see. Anyway, back to the story, to wrap up the story of my grandfather and this amazing guy who had such a huge impact on me as a person, okay? Up until this point, one of the things I haven't really expanded on was my grandfather's sense of humor, okay? Because he was a really funny guy, okay? He liked to laugh, and his sense of humor was corny sometimes, okay? But the way he would deliver his humor made everybody laugh because it was funny. Even if it was stupid, it was funny. Sometimes it was funny because it was stupid. Like, specifically, I remember a time, it was Christmas, okay? And my grandparents had come over to our house for Christmas to celebrate Christmas. And of course, Grandpa would have a gift, for each one of his grandkids, So I remember running up to him when he came in, and it was just, exciting and happy that Grandpa was there, I remember being like, oh, Grandpa, what did you get me for Christmas? And he's like, well, I'm not going to tell you, but I'll give you a hint. You get a big bang out of it, And of course it was like a gun, a toy gun, but it was like, like so stupid. It was funny, like so corny. Okay. But here's a funny story about my grandpa that my mom would tell. There's actually a couple of them that my mom likes to tell. And the one that comes to mind first is this story about how my grandfather was having like these headaches, like migraines, okay? And, he went to the doctor and everything and, take aspirin or something, that was like the answer. Well, this problem persisted, okay? And according to legend, from my mom, my grandfather was out in his yard one day, and one of the branches on one of his trees fell off, broke off the tree and fell and hit him on the head, like pretty hard, like hard enough where I think he had to go to the hospital. Okay, he got hurt. And from that point forward, he never had a migraine again. So, like, that's the kind of stuff that I would hear growing up. Another story I could tell you is, and this is another one that my mother likes to tell. My grandfather was working on a telephone line that had hooked up to someone's house, and he was, installing it or whatever. And according to myth, according to legend, the woman of the house was home, and she had at some point realized that her wedding ring was missing. Okay? And she accused my grandfather of stealing her ring. Okay? So, of course, my grandfather was like, flabbergasted, like, he would never do that, But this woman was like nutty or something, and she was, flipping out about it. So this woman had this kettle of soup or something on her stove that she was preparing. And my grandfather, grabbed the ladle and started going through the soup, trying to see if her ring was in there. Of course it wasn't. And the woman found her ring or whatever. My grandfather wasn't a thief, for crying out loud. But that's one of those stories my mom tells, and she starts to laugh, the memory of her dad. It was funny, and overall, I guess, like, when I think about my grandfather, when I think about his demeanor, that's what I remember, is that he was funny. He was always like light, especially around us kids. Okay. Now, so I've expanded on his sense of humor a little bit, his attitude about those things. But now I'm going to tell you a little bit about, well, I guess the sad part of the story, the later years. Okay. Now, I can speak about this time period of, my grandfather with some authority, because at the time that my grandfather was really going through his Alzheimer's disease situation, I was young enough to still be at home with my parents, but old enough to be strong enough to help my mother out. Okay? Now, my mother was the executor of my grandfather's will. Okay? So she had two older sisters, and they were kind of like disconnected from this process. And my mother had kind of taken on this role really by herself, because my father worked. So this was kind of like what my mom was dealing with. Okay? And I was at her side while this was happening. I was on call when she needed me. So I spent a lot of time with my mom at that point, especially when it came to, selling my grandfather's house, selling his car, preparing the house for sale, and just helping my mom out when she needed help, physical lifting of things, or, a pair of hands to move things around and help her out. And I was there, and so was my little brother too, I have to say. It wasn't just me, but most of the time it was me and my mom. Okay? And so this whole saga started when my grandmother died. Okay? Now, if you go way back to the episode of SnowFlake 33 where I'm talking about my brother Steve, I talk about being at my grandmother's funeral. Okay? And I'm talking about it in a very light and humorous way. But in reality, when my grandmother died, it was really, really sad, okay, for everybody, okay? This woman was grieved by people, okay, because she was so gentle and kind and loving. And at the time she passed away, she was very sick, very sick. She was hospitalized. She had surgeries that had gone bad, and I won't even get into that, okay? But my grandfather and my grandmother at that time had been married for over 50 years. So I think they were pushing about 60 years of marriage, maybe 65. Not quite sure. It was a long time, okay, that they had been married. And my grandfather took it very, very hard, okay? He loved this woman, okay? I mean, he loved this woman. And it's probably arguable that it went even beyond that, as I'm sure some of you may understand. When you're with somebody that long, it's not just love and it's not just marriage. It morphs into some other thing that they don't have a word for yet, okay? And like I said, my grandfather was devastated, and that's the word I would use. He was devastated. His world as he knew it was over, okay? And it was really sad to watch him decline, okay? Because he did. He did. He really suffered when she died, okay? And, you know, I remember the initial moments, you know, the initial years, just after her death, and being with my mom a lot at his house and helping him along by himself, because he wanted to live in that house. He did not want to move. He wanted to stay there. But it was just really, really dramatic and sad, okay? And I have a very clear memory of him disintegrating very slowly, okay? Emotionally, it was just a complete removal. He was completely removed from the life he had known for so long. And maybe 2, 3, 4, maybe 5 years after my grandmother died, my grandfather had spiraled down into Alzheimer's disease. Okay, and it just kicked in. And let me tell you, okay, because I had a front row seat for this. Okay, I was there with my mom, even when my dad wasn't there. It was just me and my mom dealing with her dad, going through this thing. Okay, it was something that I will never forget, or could never forget. Okay, he was lonely. Okay, but that's an understatement. Okay, he was devastated. My grandfather was devastated, and he was a very independent man. Now, you have to understand this, okay, that my grandmother was sick, and my grandfather spent the majority of their marriage, you know, being the caregiver for my very sick grandmother, okay? And like I said, he just adored her, okay? So when she died, there were phases of his grieving, and he didn't want to leave the house. He didn't want to sell the house. He wanted to stay where they had lived, okay? And he was very independent, and slowly, very slowly, he started to lose that independence. And I watched it happen, Okay. It's kind of a sad story, but it's an important part of the story because, well, one, I would say it bonded my mother and I. Okay. Not just as mother and son, but, as kind of comrades in this situation. My mother was very strong and very, direct and solid and reliable for him, but she was grieving, and she was forced into this position where, she's telling this guy, her dad, okay, who doesn't take any crap from anybody, that he can't drive anymore, that they're going to have to take his driver's license away because he doesn't remember where he is, And let me tell you, those little things like that, they're not so little. Independence is something that dies hard in people, And let me tell you, it was definitely the case with my grandfather. And like I said, it was just little by little. His independence was taken away to, and eventually it got to the point, okay, where he had to leave the house and he had to be institutionalized. There was no other option. My mother didn't have the professional expertise to deal with his problems, okay? And it was earth-shattering for him, okay? And it was difficult for my mother, and he made it difficult in a lot of ways because he did not want to give it up, but it was time. The time had come. And I'll tell you this, I had mentioned to you how his house was like a museum, okay? Well, when it came time to sell his house and, therefore empty the house out, family members came from far and wide to clean that house out, okay? And which is a testimony to, all the cool stuff he had and the valuable stuff that he had. But it was also, for me, it was a little disappointing to watch, basically, my family disintegrate into this like animalistic kind of thing where they were just grabbing and, pillaging his house, fighting over things. It was like, it was something to observe. It was definitely something I'll never forget. I remember being in the moving truck, waiting for people to be loading things into the moving truck or something, and watching people running out of the house with things in their arms and getting in their car and taking off. They weren't interested in helping him out. They were interested in getting what he had. And this was my family. Very, very weird. I'll never forget it. And just how disappointed I was and just how bizarre it was. So the house was emptied. The car was sold. The house was sold. And I was, to this day, I kind of like, I wish they wouldn't have sold that house. I would love to go back to that house. But, if wishing made it so, not the case. It's gone. It's not in the family anymore. But the house was sold. So my grandfather was in a nursing home, and he lingered for many years, okay, suffering from Alzheimer's disease, having issues with memory and all the other problems that arise from a disease that's that serious and just ravaging, and eventually, very quietly and very peacefully, surrounded by all of the people that loved him. And this was after years of visits, years of contending with issues with his estate and all those kinds of things. My poor mother was burdened with that, and it was a burden, and she handled it very well, and she was unsung in how well she handled it. But eventually my grandfather did pass away, and he did die. And, fortunately for me, okay, before he moved out of his house, I kind of had, I had first dibs on many things. I had first dibs on his possessions, okay, as a grandson. And I had the foresight to grab certain things, not valuable things, but certain things that were important to me. That machete, that I talked to you about, was one of them. There's a handful of other things too. And I'm so glad I did. I'm so glad that I did that, because these things are treasures to me now, okay? And it just speaks to this whole story of this guy and his relationship to my life, the impact. I can't express it enough, and I think as time goes on, I realize it even more, that, wow, I've watched in my own life his influence play out, and it's not conscious. It's just where I go, it's like where my brain goes, I watched him do it, and now I do it. And how I wish that he could hear the music, and he could, be aware and experience this life I have, because like I said before, if anyone would appreciate it, he would. My grandfather would be proud of the fact that I'm a musician and I'm doing what I'm doing. And I think about him, honestly, I think about him every day, really, And like I said a couple episodes back, whenever I pick up an instrument, no matter what it is, there's a little part of my brain that remembers him. And is kind of like doing it for him, because he really wanted to and he couldn't. And I was born with it. I was just given the gift. And, that sounds a little pretentious, I guess, but I don't care. I don't care, because that's not how I mean it. I just love the guy, and he was good to me. He was a good grandfather and a remarkable person. And, I just can't think of a better way to end the SnowFlake 33 story, I just can't think of a better person. He should have been story number 1, okay? But that's okay. I'm sure he understands, But so there, there you go. There's the story of this guy, and he lives through me, and it's something that I think about a lot. It is. I think about him a lot. I think about my grandfather a lot. I really do. Every day, in one form or another, he enters my mind, And I guess that's it, That's really all I wanted to say. You got the story of my grandpa. This very interesting and amazing human being that I was blessed and fortunate enough to have known. And I guess that's all I wanted to say. So, this is it, everybody. The last of SnowFlake 33. The final SnowFlake 33. And I guess this one thing is ending, we should be looking forward to the future, because there is a future for me and my podcasting, okay? And I guess I can say thank you right now to anybody who's listening to this. I guess I could name specific names, but I won't. I'll just make it all inclusive, you know. Thank you, everybody, for the past year. It's been really, really a lot of fun. I have to say that I could say, okay, that I have found through the process of doing these SnowFlake 33s how cathartic it is, actually. You know, that's something that I did not anticipate when I started. And I kind of find this hard to believe, but it's true. I have found myself wanting to forego making music so I could talk. And that may not sound like much, but it's a big deal. I mean, that's something I've actually struggled with over the past year is, you know, I need to make music. I don't have time to talk today. Well, I'll make time, you know. It's that kind of thing. I found myself enjoying it so much, you know, stepping up to the microphone and just talking, that I'm a little embarrassed about it, actually. That's probably the best way of putting it, you know. Got to be loyal to that music muse, you know. You can't abandon the muse. But, you know, let me tell you, over the past year, I've really learned to enjoy this talking bit. And I appreciate the fact that you've enjoyed my stories. I guess I could say, too, that if you're listening to this, you know, you should feel free to leave comments and things like that. It's very important to this process, you know, because this dialogue with SnowFlake 33, this dialogue with you and I is really one-sided. It's really one way, which is okay. It's a podcast and all that kind of stuff, but it really is helpful when I get feedback. It's your way of talking back or responding to what I'm talking about. And believe it or not, I mean, it plays a large part in, you know, what I'm coming up with next. So, sincerely, you know, not from a, you know, podcaster, YouTube guy perspective, you know, feel free to leave the comments. It's very important. And then I also should say, you know, from a YouTuber, podcaster point of view, please do like and subscribe and all those things, because that matters too, in a separate way, in a very different way, but it does matter. It's been a great year, folks. It's been a great year. Very interesting and very informative and fun, I have to say. You know, when talking to you rivals making music for you, there's a seismic shift taking place. Trust me. Never thought that would happen. So, with that, goodbye SnowFlake 33. Hang on, folks, for the new thing, because it's coming. Don't you worry. I won't let you down. And we're going to have a lot of fun in the future. Okay? We will. I promise. I won't let you down. Okay? So with that, this is Mike Bostwick from Pipe Choir Records signing off. And remember, folks, if you want to keep what you've got to give it away. Or talk about it at least. Take it easy.